3 secrets that you need to know heading into the Bahrain Grand Prix. I'm Jay Jack, and welcome to the Pitwall, your place for fantasy Formula One content. Please like and subscribe, hit that bell notification so you can know when we post new content. Secret number 1, price versus value. Your team consists of a $100 million budget cap. And so someone like Lewis Hamilton, for example, when he costs $33.5 million, you put that as a percentage, he is taking 33.5% of your total space. You have 6 slots on your team, and for Hamilton to cost $33.5 million, he already takes over a third of your team's space. But here's the catch. The total cost of the drivers, all 20 of them combined, is $279.7 million. That means that Hamilton, while taking 33.5% of your team space, only takes 12% of the total driver space. Is that a good enough trade-off? That's what you want to compare, not just for Hamilton, but for any other driver. Secret number 2 is for the drivers. Here are my top 2 analytical picks, and then I'll give you a value pick. First is Hamilton. He takes 12% of the driver's budget cost, but he returns roughly 10%. This is based off of 2020 percentages. Verstappen, on the other hand, he costs 8.9% of the drivers, but usually rakes in 7.4% of the points return. Fantasy Formula One has upped their values, their costs of these 2 drivers since last season. So they're trying to make sure that they aren't taking way too many points. Now, if you're having to decide between Hamilton and Verstappen, Hamilton last year scored 471 points versus Verstappen 348. That's a difference of 123 points, or an average of 7.2 points per race. So if you think that you are down 7.2 points per race, then you have to say, can I make that up with the money saved? Hamilton cost $33.5 million, while Verstappen cost $24.8 million. That is an $8.7 million difference. So if you think that you can have a better driver that can make you up 7.2 points on average per race, it's better to get those 2 drivers than to have your salary eaten up by 1 driver. But here's our value pick this week. The value pick driver is Lando Norris. He is 4.7% of the cost of the drivers, but his return is 6.3%. That's a plus 1.6%, the highest of any driver on what they are costing you versus what their potential return will be. Why is this so important? Because last year, Norris and Sainz had the closest team battle last year. They split on outperforming each other in qualifying and during the race. Now it's going to be a toss-up this season whether Norris is going to be better than his new partner. Ricciardo consistently outperformed both drivers last season. Ricciardo is now on a new team, a better team, and may fare even better. Here are the statistics. Ricciardo, he cost $17.3 million. Norris cost $13.1 million. That's a $4.2 million difference. That's not enough to afford a brand new driver, but hold on. You might be able to afford a better driver, because in 2020, Norris versus Sainz, Norris outscored Sainz by 20 points, an average of 1.17 points per race. That's nothing to write home about, but Norris versus Ricciardo, Norris was down 39 points, or an average of 2.29 points worse per race. And you have to play the whole season to get the maximum potential out of these drivers. So it's a swing of about 2 to 3 points per race, but you would be saving $4.2 million. And you might be able to afford a better driver with that extra money. Secret number 3 for the constructors. Here are the 2 top picks: Mercedes or Red Bull. Mercedes is 22.6% of the total cost for the constructors, but averages 22.5% return. That is very similar. Same thing with Red Bull, 15.4% for the cost from all the constructors, and takes in about 15.5% on return. That is very comparable. Now we have to look at is what is the total amount of points that both teams provide since last season. Mercedes outscored Red Bull last season by 315 points. That's an average of 18 points per race. Now, many of your drivers are not going to be able to make up that deficit. And especially if you're going with Red Bull, you need to make sure that you've got drivers that can make up 18 points. Now, for Mercedes, costing $38 million, and Red Bull costing $25.9 million, that's a $12.1 million difference. you could buy a better driver. And just put this in perspective, this season, Max Verstappen has Sergio Perez. He was one of the highest scoring drivers last season, which means the Red Bull's stocks might rise if the two drivers are consistently getting more points to have that deficit of 18 points. Now, here is the value pick. The constructor value pick right now is Alpine. The last year was Renault. They have 9.2% of the total cost of constructors, but the return is a plus 1.4. They're averaging 10.6% of the total points returned for the constructors. That is a good swing, 1.4%. But here is the problem. Does that return on investment warrant the point deficit that you're going to see over the course of a season? Alpine costs you $15.4 million, while Mercedes is $22.6 and Red Bull is $10.5 million difference. You are saving $22.6 million with getting Alpine instead of Mercedes. You are saving $10.5 million if you go with Alpine instead of Red Bull, which would give you 1 to 2 better drivers. But what is the value exchange? If you are going to pick Alpine instead of Mercedes, you have to make up 31.5 points on average per race. And if you have Alpine instead of Red Bull, you have to make up at least 13 points per race. It may not be worth going with anything outside of Mercedes or Red Bull. Now on to the picks. I'm going to show you my preferred lineup for this race weekend. I'm going to offer you 2 scenarios, both having the same constructor of Mercedes. Now, you cannot afford both Mercedes and Hamilton, so next best is Verstappen. To save some money, I'm going to go with Norris. Now, this is where things will separate. We can go with scenario number 1. Gasly. Now, Tsunoda is looking pretty good, but if Gasly is going to beat him over the course of the season, he's going to give you more bonus points, especially with the Honda engine improving. The next 2, since we only have 12.4 million left to spend, is going with Mick Schumacher, since he will probably outperform his teammate, and then George Russell. Now, you're going to notice here that George Russell costs less than Latifi, and that's because last season Russell was often qualifying ahead of his teammate, but then losing positions during the race because the car was really fast over 1 lap. And so you would actually not get as many points as you would think with Russell because you were losing them over the course of the race weekend. You have to remember there's 2 sets of points given, 1 during qualifying and 1 during the race. So that is scenario number 1. Now, scenario number 2 is going to take a different approach. Instead of putting Gasly, if you think Tsunoda is going to outperform Gasly, you pick up Yuki Tsunoda, who is cheaper, and then that'll give you room to be able to afford Giovinazzi. The Alfa Romeo is going to be better than the Haas for most of the season. Being able to save a little bit on a AlphaTauri driver will give you the ability to get an Alfa Romeo driver. Now, we will still end up with Russell here at the end. So you either go with a more expensive AlphaTauri driver and get a Haas, or you get the cheaper AlphaTauri driver and get an Alfa Romeo. Now, we're going to go next. We're going to save and turbo Norris, and then compare it to my other team. The other team here, I've got Red Bull as the constructor, and I still have Verstappen. Theoretically, you could have picked up Hamilton, but I did not like the options that you have there. Here, if you think Ferrari is going to do better, I was able to afford both Leclerc and Ricciardo, turboing him because he's a very good person to turbo. And then, of course, you got Yuki Tsunoda and Russell. So the question is, do you think Ricciardo and Leclerc are going to make up the point differential between Red Bull and Mercedes? If you think so, you can go with that option. And there you have it. And until next time, I'll see you on the pit wall.